Welcome to Moonlight Mysteries, a calm space for long research-rich mysteries. If you enjoy these sleepy deep dives, please like this video, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss new episodes. If you'd like to support the channel, a quick comment with your favorite moment helps more people find us. Now settle in, dim the lights, and let's begin. Göbekli Tepe, Chapter 1. A Stillness on Potbelly Hill. Dawn breaks over the serene hills of Göbekli Tepe, the Potbelly Hill, bathing in ancient landscape in gentle light. In the distance lies the Haran Plain, in the headwaters of the Balik River, once a fertile savanna teeming with wild gazelles and stands of acorn wheat. On this hilltop, great stone circles slumber beneath protective canopies. A hush lingers among the limestone pillars, sentinels from a distant age. In the soft morning air, you can almost imagine figures moving among the stones, voices chanting low, footfalls stirring dust in the first temple of humankind. Here, on this rise in southeastern Turkey, humanity's deep past whispers through carved symbols and towering megaliths. Göbekli Tepe, Belly Hill in Turkish, is not just an archaeological site. It is an experience, a place where time layers upon itself. In the stillness, the weight of the 12,000 years presses gently on the senses. This was a sacred gathering place, long before the pyramids, before the Stonehenge, even before our species learned to make pottery or farm the lands. Each stone pillar, moss-kissed and etched with animals, is a storyteller. Together, they form circles and ovals, enclosures that once stood roofed against the sky. The human hands that shaped these stones have long vanished, but their spirits seem to linger in the artistry and arrangement. In this meditative journey, we will wander among these silent stones and explore the mysteries they guard. We will trace the archaeological history of Göbekli Tepe, from its quiet discovery to the excavation that revealed a site beyond anyone's expectations. We will step back into the pre-pottery Neolithic world, envisioning life at the end of the Ice Age, the wild landscape, the first experiments with farming, the dawning of belief. We will visit sister sites, Karahantepe, Nevalı, Çori, and Çayönü, piecing together a larger story of a culture that built monumental sanctuaries across the region. Along the way, we will meander down tangents of climate history, recalling the Younger Dryas cold snap and how early humans adapted. We will drip through threads of mythology, skyborn vultures, creation tales of paradise lost, perhaps even echoes of the biblical Eden. We will present both the solid ground of mainstream archaeological interpretation and the eerie realms of speculation. Theories of ancient advanced civilizations, astronomical alignments of pillars to the stars, ideas of lost knowledge encoded in stone, impossible connection to enduring myths. As you listen, imagine the warm breeze over the hill, the distant call of an eagle, the sunlight and shadow playing on ancient carvings. Let us begin at the beginning, the reawakening of Göbekli Tepe in modern times, and gradually uncover the secrets of this Neolithic sanctuary, chapter by chapter, stone by stone. Chapter 2, Rediscovery. In the dry summer of 1963, a team of American and Turkish researchers trudged up a round hill outside Şanlıurfa, Turkey. They noted scattered flints in a few protruding stones, but the hilltop ruins did not rouse much excitement. The academics assumed it was just another medieval cemetery and moved on. Little did they know, they were walking over the roof of an 11,000 years old mystery. Göbekli Tepe slumbered on, with only the local Kurdish and Turkish villagers aware of ancient pot-belly stones littering their fields. 3 decades passed. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt visited the site and immediately sensed its significance. Unlike the flat surrounding plateaus, this hill had a gentle, unnaturally rounded summit, a telltale sign of human-made buildup. Broken limestone slabs jutted out of the soil, which older surveys had misjudged as headstones. But Schmidt realized these were the tops of T-shaped megaliths, not graves. Only man could have created something like this, he recalled thinking, recognizing a Stone Age site of immense scale. In that moment, Göbekli Tepe began to stir from obscurity. Schmidt returned in 1995 with a small team and permission to excavate. As they carefully scraped and brushed the earth, the hill yielded its first secrets. Colossal stone pillars emerging into the light, arranged in rings. Some lay just below the plow zone, their tops scarred by farmers' blades. Others were still deeply buried, waiting. The archaeologists were astonished at what they didn't find. There were no building remains of houses, no hearth, no trash pits, none of the domestic debris one expects from an inhabited village. In place of homes, they found beauty and enigma. Stone tools like flint blades and hammers, eerily sophisticated carvings of animals, and those towering pillars set in circular stone walls. Carbon dating of soil and tool residue pointed to circa 9,500 BCE for the earliest construction, a time when humans were still in the Stone Age, millennia before writing or metal, centuries before agriculture was established. The whispers that this hill was something unprecedented began to spread through the archaeological community. Under Schmidt's guidance, excavation continued each spring and autumn. The winters were too wet and summers brutally hot for digging. By the early 2000s, Göbekli Tepe was hailed as potentially the world's oldest temple, a ceremonial site built by hunter-gatherers. Ground-penetrating radar and geomagnetic surveys revealed at least 16 to 20 stone enclosures, still hidden beneath the 15-meter-tall mound. Excavation has been deliberately slow and careful. Even by 2021, only about 10% of the site had been uncovered. The uncovered portions, though, was enough to shock experts and capture imagination worldwide. In recognition of its universal value as one of the first manifestations of human-made monumental architecture, Göbekli Tepe was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2018. Tourists began flocking to see its rings of pillars, now sheltered under futuristic white canopies. What had been a lonely hilltop with a single mulberry tree, a local pilgrimage spot, became a celebrated archaeological park. After Klaus Schmidt's untimely passing in 2014, the excavation project became a joint Turkish-German effort led by the Sanliurfa Museum, Istanbul University, and the German Archaeological Institute. Turkish prehistorian Necmi Karo took the helm. New technology and fresh perspectives followed. The site's story began to evolve with each discovery. What Schmidt had interpreted as a purely cultic site of nomadic worshippers is now being reconsidered in light of evidence for settlement, hearths, domestic refuse, even possible houses on the slopes of the mound. Yet, the essential wonder of Göbekli Tepe remains unchanged. It stands as a testament to human creativity at the dawn of civilization, a place where people gathered for purposes we are still struggling to understand. With its limited excavation, Göbekli Tepe keeps much of its story buried, enticing us with tantalizing glimpse. Standing at the fenced edge of an excavated pit today, one peers down at pillars that tower 5 to 5.5 meters high, 16 feet, and weigh 7 to 10 tons each. They are arranged in circles up to 20 meters, 65 feet across. In the center of each circle, 2 great pillars face each other, encircled by slightly smaller pillars along the inner walls. This layout repeats in enclosure after enclosure, a signature design carried out over centuries. It is humbling to realize that only simple flint tools were used to carve these monoliths and sculpt their decorations. The builders had no beasts of burden or wheeled carts. Human hands and ingenuity raised these stones. As Schmidt once remarked, Seeing the dense array of megaliths under the hill, we could dig here for 50 more years and barely scratch the surface. And so we have the stage, a hilltop in Upper Mesopotamia that went from overlooked to world famous in a generation. The rediscovery of Göbekli Tepe opened a new chapter in our understanding of the Neolithic. But to appreciate why it upended scholars' views, we must delve into what was known, or assumed, about the rise of civilization, and how a place like this seemingly should not have existed when it did. Let us journey further back to the world of Göbekli Tepe's creators and explore the site's physical features in the cultural context that birthed them. Chapter 3: Stones in Circles, Architecture of the Ancients. Walking into the main excavation pit of Göbekli Tepe, feels like stepping into an open-air cathedral of prehistory. The site's layout is dominated by round and oval buildings, each defined by a ring of T-shaped stone pillars connected by low stone walls. Archaeologists label these structures enclosure A, B, C, D, and so on, each one a slightly different variation on the theme of the megalithic circle. Enclosure D, one of the oldest and best preserved, greets visitors with two gigantic central pillars rising side by side, encircled by a dozen smaller pillars around the perimeter. These central monoliths, smooth and imposing, once supported the roof of the structure. One can still see rectangular mortise holes on their tops where roof beams might have fitted. The entire building would have been roofed with wood and thatch or skins, creating an interior chamber shut off from the sun. Each T-shaped pillar has a wider top that resembles a horizontal capstone, giving it the appearance of a giant abstract human. The top might symbolize broad shoulders. Indeed, many pillars have carved arms, hands, belts, and loincloths, confirming they were meant to represent stylized humanoid figures. Pillar 18 in enclosure D, for example, has on its broad face the low relief of an outstretched arm ending in a finely carved hand that seems to rest just above a fox carved below. The pillar sides carry a detailed belt with a buckle and a loincloth motif, implying this stone might embody a deity or ancestor figure wearing ceremonial attire. To stand before Pillar 18 is to feel in the presence of an enigmatic being, a stone giant, gazing eternally towards its twin across the enclosure. The inner face of Pillar 18 in enclosure D, showing a raised relief of a human arm and a leaping fox. The pillar's T-shape and carved hands suggest an anthropomorphic figure, perhaps representing a guardian or deity of the Neolithic builders. The craftsmanship of these figures is remarkable. The circular walls were built of rough stone and mud mortar, but carefully plastered in place. Floor in some enclosures were made of hardened lime terrazzo, a kind of primitive concrete, which would have given a smooth, polished surface for the ceremonial space. In enclosure C and D, parts of the floor survive, revealing a whitish limestone surface that was renewed over time. This detail links Göbekli Tepe to later sites like Nevalı Çori and Çayönü, where lime plaster floors are also found in cult buildings. Stone benches line the inner faces of the circular walls in some enclosures, perhaps as seating or altars. Intriguingly, there are also narrow stone portals, small openings or doorways carved through the stone walls between pillars. In one enclosure, a rectangular slab with a circular hole was found set in the floor, possibly functioning as a symbolic doorway into the underworld or spirit realm. Visitors to the site today can peer through a reconstructed portal and imagine stooped figures entering these sanctums in single file. A closer look at the layout suggests these stone circles were not built haphazardly. Recent archaeological analysis revealed an underlying geometric plan. The center points of three of the major enclosures, B, C, and D, form a near-perfect equilateral triangle, indicating they were designed with respect to each other. This finding, published in 2020, implies that the builders of Göbekli Tepe used some form of planning or measurement, essentially an early form of archaeological design, to arrange their monuments. The idea that nomadic hunter-gatherers could conceive a geometric site plan thousands of years before the invention of formal geometry is mind-bending. Yet here we have evidence of precisely that. It appears the people of Göbekli Tepe built to a design, coordinating multiple stone circles as parts of a greater whole. This sophistication hints that the site was conceived as a monumental project, possibly by groups working together or guided by master builders who shared a common vision. Göbekli Tepe's builders had abundant raw material at hand. The hill itself is a cap of soft limestone bedrock, which they quarried directly. Around the tell, archaeologists have found numerous quarry pits and unfinished pillars, one still attached to the bedrock, measuring a staggering 6.9 meters or 22.5 feet long. That was apparently abandoned during extraction. Flint tools served as chisels and pickaxe. We can imagine teams of workers wearing down flint blades as they pounded and chipped the bedrock to free each massive pillar. Once a pillar's form was roughly hewn from the limestone plateau, it had to be transported a short distance, sometimes just a few hundred meters, to its intended location in the circles. Without wheels or draft animals, the likely methods were human muscle, ropes, and log rollers or sleds. Experiments have shown that dozens of people with ropes could drag a 10-ton pillar given a stable pathway. The bases of the pillars were shaped into tenons that fits into slot carved in bedrock or stone pedestals in the enclosures, locking them in upright. Raising each pillar would have been a perilous communal effort, perhaps requiring wooden levers and lots of coordination, as the stone was inched upright to drop into its footing. The accomplishment of erecting these monoliths in the 10th millennium BCE speaks of a highly organized workforce and shared intent. Another striking aspect is that the enclosures were repeatedly renovated and ritually buried. Over the centuries, a typical sequence might have been: a circle was constructed, used for some generations, then intentionally backfilled with rubble and soil, before a new circle was built nearby or on top of it. This artificial burial is evidenced by the homogeneous infill packed around pillars containing flint tools, animal bones, and broken sculpture fragments, debris not naturally washed in, but placed there by people. Schmidt and others deduced that around 8000 BCE, the final Neolithic inhabitants deliberately entombed the entire complex, burying the standing stones under thousands of tons of earth. Why would a society bury its own monumental structures, as if decommissioning a sacred site? We do not fully know. Perhaps the spiritual or social paradigm changed. A new beliefs or a new era rendered the old sanctuaries obsolete or taboo, prompting a grand closure ceremony where the stones were returned to the earth. Some have speculated more fancifully that they bury the site in an attempt to hide or protect something, or out of guilt or fear to appease gods or seal off potent powers. All we have is the fact: Göbekli Tepe was intentionally buried, preserving it like a time capsule for future ages. Karahantepe, a sister site we will soon discuss, shows the same pattern of careful burials, strongly suggesting a cultural practice of closing down sanctuaries when their time had passed. Thus, the architectural story of Göbekli Tepe is one of ambitious creation and deliberate interment. The site grew through Layer 3, oldest, to Layer 2, later phases. The earliest rings, like Enclosure D, are the largest and finest, belonging to pre-pottery Neolithic A around 9600 and 8800 BCE. Later, smaller rectangular buildings with smaller pillars mark pre-pottery Neolithic B after 8800 BCE as the tradition waned. By 8200 to 8000 BCE, activity ceased and the hill was capped off. What remains for us are the stone ghosts of those structures, resurrected by archaeologists' hands. As you stand at the viewing platform today, looking down into Enclosure D, with its twin central giants, try to picture it in its heyday. A roof overhead, torches or sunlight flickering on exquisitely carved reliefs, perhaps painted walls and decorated altars. The architecture provides the stage, an arena for ritual. And next, we will explore the rich gallery of symbols and carvings that adorn these stones in an effort to understand the beliefs and minds of Göbekli Tepe's people. Chapter 4: Carvings in Stone, the Language of Symbols. Every pillar at Göbekli Tepe is also a canvas. Into the hard limestone, the Neolithic artisans chiseled a bestiary of the wild world they knew, and perhaps a symbolic code that we struggle to decipher. The carvings on the T-shaped megaliths are low reliefs, images that protrude slightly from the stone's surface, of animals, abstract symbols, and even human figures in parts. Walking among the pillars feels like wandering through an ancient art gallery of the Stone Age. Snakes coil along the edges of pillars. Foxes leap across their faces. Boars, lions, and aurochs, wild cattle, charge in profile. Spiders, scorpions, and buzzing insects lurk in the corners. These creatures are depicted with a confident, naturalistic hand. The artists were clearly familiar with their anatomy and spirit. Yet, notably, many of the carved animals are dangerous or wild, predator and scavengers rather than the edible game animals one might expect. There are almost no carvings of deer or gazelle, the main prey of hunters, but instead an abundance of snakes, fierce felines, scorpions, vultures, and ibex. It is a scary, fantastic world of nasty-looking beasts, as one archaeologist puts it. What could this menagerie mean? One interpretation is that these were totemic or guardian animals, perhaps spirit beings that had protective or ritual significance. The vulture, in particular, appears prominently and may hold a key. On the famous Pillar 43, often dubbed the Vulture Stone, a large vulture is carved with wings outspread, seemingly interacting with a disc-shaped above, sometimes interpreted as a head or the sun, and smaller vulture or bird below. Another figure on that pillar appears to be a headless human with an erect phallus accompanied by a scorpion. In some cultures, vultures were seen as intermediaries between life and death, carrying the souls or flesh of the dead up to the heavens. Indeed, at sites contemporary with Göbekli Tepe in Neolithic Syria, similar vulture motifs have been found, suggesting a common symbolic language. This ties in with the idea of excarnation, a funerary practice where bodies of the dead are left exposed for carrion birds to clean the bones. Klaus Schmidt himself speculated that Göbekli Tepe might have been a sky burial site or a center of a death cult where people brought their dead, laid them out among the pillars to be defleshed by vultures, and then perhaps ritually buried the bones elsewhere. He noted the hill's commanding view in poetic orientation. From here, the dead are looking out at the ideal view, a hunter's dream, gazing over the game-rich plains that were paradise to these foragers. If the site was indeed associated with mortuary rites, the abundance of predatory animal could represent the forces of decay and transformation, powerful, revered, and feared creatures that escorted souls to the afterlife. The headless human figure on Pillar 43, rather than simply symbolizing death, could be part of a narrative or ritual scene. As the German team pointed out, that figure's prominent phallus suggests a regenerative or life aspect, not solely demise. It hints that these symbols were part of a complex story, perhaps about life, death, and rebirth. Apart from animals, the pillars also bear abstract symbols, rows of short lines, crescents, discs, H-shaped symbols, and other geometric shapes. On one pillar, a pattern of carved squares almost resembles an abstract honeycomb. These might have been meaningful markers, perhaps clan symbols, counts of something, or mythological motifs. Without any written explanation, we are, after all, 6,000 years before writing. Their meaning is elusive. Some researchers have leapt to both theories, suggesting these symbols record astronomical events or dates, but mainstream archaeologists urge caution. We cannot assume, for instance, that a scorpion on a pillar meant the same to its carvers as Scorpio the constellation did to Greeks 10,000 years later. The symbols likely form an internal iconography unique to this culture, a symbolic shorthand we haven't cracked. However, patterns can be discerned. Certain animals dominate specific enclosures. Enclosure D's pillars feature a lot of foxes. Enclosure C has boars and snakes. Enclosure A shows waterfowl and snakes. Researchers have noticed that each building might have had a particular theme or favored set of symbols. This raises the intriguing possibility that each stone circle was associated with a particular group or cult within its own totem animal. Maybe different clans or tribes coming together, each building and venerating their own pillar shrine marked by their emblem. The distribution of motifs is not random, which implies intention. In addition to relief carvings, Göbekli Tepe has yielded some freestanding sculptures. Within the fill of the enclosures, Schmidt's team found limestone statues and figurine fragments, a fierce-looking wild boar figurine, a coiled snake carved in the round, and the top of a human statue. One particularly haunting discovery is a life-size human stone head with bold features and piercing hollowed eyes that may have been inlaid with stone or shell. This head has a striking similarity to the so-called Urfa man, a full statue found in nearby Urfa city, which has an eerie blank gaze with black obsidian eyes. Urfa man, dated to roughly 9000 BCE, stands about 1.8 meters tall, hands folded in front of his torso, and is considered the oldest known life-size human statue. He was not found at Göbekli Tepe itself, but in the same region, and he shares the posture of the T-pillars, arms brought together over the belly, as if humble or protective. This suggests that the T-pillars, though abstract, embody anthropomorphic beings, possibly gods or ancestor spirits, and the Urfa man statue is like a smaller scale representation of the same concept, a guardian of the shrine with watchful eyes. It is stirring to realize that in the dim interior of these stone circles, the people of Göbekli Tepe might have stood face to face with such statue or closely observed the carved reliefs as part of their rites. Firelight would animate the engravings, a snake seeming to slither as shadows danced, the vulture's wings flickering on the pillar side. One carving deserves special mention. On a pillar in enclosure D, a majestically carved lion or leopard in high relief appears to be crawling around the pillar's edge. Big cats were certainly present in the environment, Anatolian leopards, for instance, and on some pillars, pairs of lions are depicted with their jaws open. At another site, a carving shows a leopard gripping a human, a dramatic scene that has paralleled in Göbekli's art. The prominence of dangerous predators like lions and leopards, sometimes shown dominating humans, might symbolize the wild forces that these people sought to appease or invoke. Perhaps the builders of Göbekli Tepe mythologized these animals as spirits or gods. Bulls also appear, their horns rendered in a twisted perspective to show both horns menacingly forward. Later in Mesopotamia and Anatolian culture, bulls and lions frequently figure as sacred or royal symbols. Could Göbekli Tepe be an early root of that iconography? It's tempting to think so, even if separated by millennia. Lastly, evidence emerged in recent years that added a rather macabre element to the symbolism: the discovery of modified human skulls at Göbekli Tepe. In 2017, archaeologists announced that fragmentary skulls found in the site's debris bore deliberate cut marks in drill holes, indicating skin was removed and holes were made to perhaps suspend the skulls on cords. This is a clear sign of a skull cult. Indeed, in Chapter 2, we touched on the idea of skull veneration. Now we have direct physical proof, at least 3 skulls, with carvings that suggest they were hung or displayed, possibly in the temple's precinct. One can imagine skulls of ancestors or esteemed individuals dangling from rafters or placed in niches, literally adding human presence to the stone assembly. This practice aligns with findings at Çayönü, a contemporaneous site we'll discuss later, where a special skull building contained human skulls and evidence of blood, likely from ritual sacrifice. The carving of vultures playing with headless bodies on Göbekli's pillar take on a more concrete meaning in light of the skull cult. They could be depicting what was actually done: bodies defleshed, skulls collected, souls released. It's a visceral ritual, one that may have been at the core of their spiritual life. Despite these clues, the meaning behind Göbekli Tepe's art remains enigmatic. As archaeologist Gary Rolifson aptly said, trying to interpret such prehistoric symbolism is almost futile across the gulf of time. We have no Rosetta Stone for this symbolic language, yet by carefully studying patterns and comparing with other sites, researchers craft hypotheses. The carvings likely served multiple purposes: communication, commemoration, myth-telling, and invocation. They could mark tales of creation or origins, perhaps tribal stories of how certain animals gave wisdom or trials to humans. They may demarcate sacred spaces, warding off evil by depicting it like scarecrow symbols to keep malevolent spirit at bay. Or they are totems of groups that built each enclosure in early form of heraldry carved in stone. We sense that these stones held profound significance for the people who carved them. They would not expend such effort otherwise. The effect on a modern observer is awe and mystery. Many visitors to Göbekli Tepe reports a feeling of eeriness. The art is powerful, yet alien, utterly foreign, placed there by people who saw the world in a way I will never comprehend, wrote one journalist after standing among the megaliths. That humbling feeling is part of Göbekli Tepe's magic. One might say, here are messages from a world before words, a sacred library in limestone. The symbols dance just beyond our reach, inviting us to dream what they meant. To pursue that invitation further, we will step back and look at the world these artists lived in, the climate, the land, the daily life, and how a community of hunter-gatherers might have flourished enough to raise a temple on a hill. Chapter 5: Dawn of a New Age. Life in the Pre-Pottery Neolithic. Picture the world of Göbekli Tepe's builders. The last ice age had ended, and the younger Dryas, a final cold snap, had faded around 9600 BCE, giving way to a warming climate. Southeastern Anatolia, where Göbekli Tepe sits, was transforming into an inviting steppe land. The site's surroundings were warmer and wetter than today. Instead of the arid fields one sees now, you would find open oak pistachio forests and lush grassland. Wild grains like einkorn, wheat, and barley grew abundantly on the hillsides. Herds of animals roamed, wild sheep and goats on the slopes, gazelles passing seasonally across the plains, wild cattle and pigs in the thicket. The nearby streams and perhaps springs provided water, and people knew how to harvest rainwater in carved basins on the plateau. It was as Klaus Schmidt described, like a paradise for hunter-gatherers, a bountiful land at the northern edge of the Fertile Crescent, where nature offered a rich buffet of food. This natural plenty may be one reason why groups could gather in large numbers here. The environment could support feasting crowds without immediate farming. The people of Göbekli Tepe were still hunter-gatherers, but they were not mere nomads wandering aimlessly. They appeared to have practiced a semi-sedentary lifestyle, perhaps living in small villages part of the year, then congregating at Göbekli Tepe seasonally for communal activities. Archaeological evidence indicates that they lived in villages and harvested wild cereal extensively. In fact, analysis of tools such as grinding stones, mortars, and pestles found at the site shows they were processing grain on a large scale. These grains were likely the wild ancestors of domesticated einkorn, gathered from the surrounding hills. At a site just 20 miles away, genetic remains of the earliest domesticated wheat have been found, dating to shortly after Göbekli's main period. It seems that within a few centuries of the gathering at Göbekli Tepe, the locals had started consciously planting and cultivating these cereals. Archaeologist Charles Mann phrased it as perhaps peoples first came to Göbekli to worship, and einkorn wheat was first domesticated near Göbekli Tepe, perhaps to feed those who came to worship. Similarly, animal bones at the site tell a story of diet and hunting. Zoo archaeologist Joris Peters examined over 100,000 bone fragments from Göbekli Tepe. The vast majority, more than 60%, were of gazelles. The rest included boar, wild sheep, wild goat, red deer, and many birds like ducks and geese. No domesticated animals are present. These remains are all from wild game. Cut marks and burned ends showed they were butchered and roasted. We can imagine large hunt parties fanning out in summer and autumn, prime seasons for gazelle migration, and bring back dozens of gazelles to feed a celebratory gathering. Indeed, feasting might have been a central part of the Göbekli Tepe ritual cycle, perhaps to entice people to travel from afar to help build and attend ceremonies. Recent finds of massive stone basins or troughs at the site lend credence to this. These basins could hold dozens of gallons of liquid and have residues suggesting fermentation. In essence, beer brewing vats. Imagine the scene after a day of work raising pillars or a solemn ritual in the stone circle. As evening falls, fires are lit. People sit on the stone benches, sharing roasted meat and a rudimentary beer made from fermented grain mash, a hearty ritual ale to bond the community. The concept that beer and feasting helped drive social cooperation at Göbekli Tepe is speculative, but very plausible, as similar ideas have been proposed for Stonehenge and other ancient sites. Living partially settled also meant these people built dwellings. While no houses were found right on the hill's summit, perhaps deliberately kept sacred and free of domestic clutter, nearby settlements almost certainly existed. In fact, in recent years, excavations at Göbekli's outskirts and at sites like Karahantepe revealed clusters of houses or rooms with hearths and everyday debris. At Karahantepe, for example, researchers found not only ritual structures, but also what appear to be domestic structures, indicating a permanent community alongside the ceremonial centers. This suggests that Göbekli Tepe might have had a resident population maintaining it year-round, even if additional folks came seasonally for big events. The presence of water harvesting systems at Göbekli, channels and cisterns carved to collect rainwater, also implies people stayed long enough to need stored water or to survive dry seasons. Let us consider their technology and tools. They were in the Neolithic, but specifically pre-Pottery Neolithic, meaning they had stone tools, but had not yet invented pottery for cooking or storage. Instead, they made do with baskets, wooden bowls, animal skins, and carved stone vessels. Indeed, some beautiful stone bowls and platters have been found at Göbekli Tepe, finely carved out of limestone. They even decorated these, as one fragment shows a bas relief of dancing humans and perhaps a boar, as if the story spilled onto their tableware. They used obsidian and flint for cutting. Obsidian would have been imported from quite far. The nearest sources are in central Turkey or far eastern Anatolia, indicating trade networks or long journeys. For daily subsistence, they gathered fruit. Pistachios and almonds were around. 90% of charcoal remains are from those trees, roots, and hunted frequently. Evidence from the other nearby PPN sites, like Karahantepe, shows they also fished and collected riverine resources. At Göbekli, though, fishing seems less evident due to its hilltop position away from big rivers. Socially, what can we say? These were pre-urban societies, but they were organized. The coordination to build Göbekli structures suggests leadership of some kind, whether a chieftain, a shamanic council, or a communal decision-making process. We don't see obvious signs of hierarchy, like extravagant burials or palaces, so some propose that these gatherings were collaborative efforts by egalitarian bands of people who came together under shared belief. Perhaps ritual leaders played key roles, convincing disparate groups to unite their labor for common spiritual projects. As excavator Ian Hodder noted, building something like Göbekli Tepe would require hundreds of workers and a reliable way to feed them. This likely led to more permanent settlements in the area to support the workforce. In essence, the beginnings of societal complexity arising to meet a religious need. This flips the old idea that farming came first and temples second. Here, the temple came first and may have spurred farming. The labor and planning that went into Göbekli Tepe is a precursor to what we later see as civilization. It is an early form of large-scale cooperation that would eventually bloom into the first villages and towns. The people themselves would have looked like other early West Eurasian populations. Analysis of remains from China and other sites suggests they were moderately tall, rugged from a life of physical work, and likely had skin tones and features akin to Near Eastern and Anatolian hunter-gatherers. Some genetic studies indicates a mix of ancestry from Anatolia and the Levant. We don't have confirmed burials from Göbekli Tepe itself. No graves have been identified on site so far, aside from secondary deposits of bones, but we can guess their burial customs from sites like Karahantepe and Jurf al-Anmar. Often, they buried their dead beneath house floors or in cemeteries, sometimes removing skulls for separate veneration. They wore beads of stone, shell, and bone. A delightful find at Göbekli Tepe is a polished stone bracelet, astonishingly modern looking with its smooth black sheen, showing they had an eye for personal adornment and skill in lapidary work. They also made hundreds of clay figurines, especially at Nevalı Çori, small 5-centimeter figures of humans or animals, apparently for ritual offering. Interestingly, these clay figurines predate fire pottery, yet some were baked at 500 to 600 degrees Celsius, a hint of experimentation with clay that foreshadows true pottery. Culturally, we are in what archaeologists term Pre-Pottery Neolithic A, PPNA, followed by the Pre-Pottery Neolithic B, PPNB. The PPNA circa 9600 to 8800 BCE saw the beginnings of village life, permanent human settlements in the world's first experiments with agriculture. Göbekli Tepe was founded in this period, an outgrowth of societies that were settling down but not yet fully farming. By the PPNB, 8800 to 7000 BCE, farming and herding gradually took hold and spread. Göbekli Tepe's later layers correspond to early PPNB, after which it was abandoned as new cultural practices emerged. In these transitional times, they domesticated the dog, likely earlier actually. Dogs might have been domesticated by 12,000 or so years ago. And indeed, dog bones are found at some early sites. Then sheep or goat by around 8000 BCE in this region, followed by pigs and cattle shortly after. For plants, aside from wheat, they were working with lentils, peas, and other cereals. The region around Göbekli, the upper Mesopotamian foothills, is now understood as a core zone where multiple domestications occurred. Wheat at Karahantepe nearby, pigs possibly at Çayönü. Some claim the pig was first domesticated there, and perhaps cattle management also began in these early villages. It truly was an age of innovation, though spread out over centuries. Life was changing, from roaming small bands to larger groups staying put, from purely wild food to tinkering with cultivation, from simple camps to durable structures and monumental works. The climate backdrop is important. Just before Göbekli's establishment, Earth went through the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to near glacial cold from around 10,800 BCE to 9,600 BCE. This ended abruptly with a sharp warming and likely rising sea levels globally as glaciers melted. Some scientists have controversially theorized that a cosmic event, a comet or meteor airburst, triggered the Younger Dryas cooling by causing massive fires and dust, an idea known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. If such a cataclysm occurred, it would have been in the cultural memory of Göbekli Tepe's people, passed down by a few hundred years. Whether or not a comet struck, it's clear that after around 9,600 BCE, the climate improved, making the Near East wetter. This favorable turn might have allowed populations to grow and congregate in places like Göbekli Tepe, seizing the opportunity to build and celebrate. Some researchers speculate that the impetus to start farming was partly a response to the fluctuations at the end of the Ice Age, Maybe wild resources dwindled during the cold snap and rebounded after, prompting humans to cultivate reliability. In any case, Göbekli Tepe sits at the pivot of this great human transition from foraging to farming, and the life of its people straddled both worlds. They hunted gazelles, but also ground grain. They had no livestock, but built massive structures. They used no metal, but engineered in stone. What might a day in their life have been like, especially during a Göbekli Tepe gathering? Let's imagine. At dawn, thin smoke rises from cooking fires outside the sacred area. Families who camped in nearby encampments stir from sleep. The air is cool, scented with wild grasses and last night's embers. Hunters depart in coordinated groups, fanning into the hill with flint-tipped spears and bows, aiming to bring back antelope or goats by afternoon. Others fetch water from a spring, pour it into cisterns carved in rock. In a temporary workshop area, a few skilled knappers chip away at fresh flint, replenishing the supply of blades and arrowheads. Within the main stone circles, perhaps access is restricted to certain initiated members, shamans or elders, who at sunrise perform a small ritual, maybe offering a libation at the base of the central pillars. Imagine a jug of fermented barley drink poured out in honor of the stone guardians. By mid-morning, a workforce gathers to continue work on a new enclosure. You hear the rhythmic thunk of stone hammers on limestones as artisans carve a relief, perhaps a new fox on a pillar being shaped. Others plaster a section of floor or haul debris out of an older enclosure, being prepared for final burial. There's chatter, maybe chanting. Children dart around, occasionally being shooed away from the dangerous pits. At midday, the sun is hot, so people retreat to shade, perhaps simple shelters or the lee of a wall to eat. They crack open roasted pistachios and share dried meat. With some rest, the activities resume. Practice for an evening ceremony might involve painting one's body or face, or retrieving sacred objects from a secure place to be displayed. By dusk, as the hunters return triumphantly with game slung on poles, fires roar to life. The community gather in a large circle around the main enclosure. Some beats a simple drum made of skin. Another shakes a rattle of dried gourd with seeds. In the flickering firelight, figures would dance, perhaps reenacting a myth of creation involving the animals on the pillars, their shadows thrown up onto the megaliths. A storyteller or shaman could be narrating how the spider tamed the scorpion, or how vulture carried the first man's soul to heaven. The pillars loom around. Their carving seems to move by fire shadow, a truly magical theater. Then comes the feast. Gazelle meat roasting, the scent mingling with wild herbs. They ladle out a tart, beer-like brew from the stone vats into cups or skins, passing them around. Laughter, prayers, new friendships and alliances cemented in shared labor and celebration. This was the social glue of these early societies. And as the Milky Way glows overhead in an unpolluted sky, perhaps some look up and feel that the pattern of stars related to the stories told, linking heaven and earth in that sacred space. It's easy in such moments to understand how myth and ritual were born, binding communities together and inspiring feats like building Göbekli Tepe. With this picture of daily life in cultural context in mind, we can better appreciate the significance of Göbekli Tepe. It was not an anomaly that popped out of nowhere. It was nourished by the conditions and innovations of its time. Yet, it still stands out as extraordinary. The scale of construction and the focus on ritual gathering far exceeds what we typically see in small Neolithic hamlets. This suggests a regional or intergroup importance. In the next chapter, we will widen our lens and look at related sites. Göbekli Tepe was the flagship of a whole constellation of early Neolithic sanctuaries and settlements in Upper Mesopotamia. By comparing notes with places like Karahantepe, Nevalı, Çori, and Çayönü, we can start to piece together the larger cultural puzzle and see how Göbekli Tepe might be both unique and yet part of an extended family of sites that together hint at a lost civilization of the Tepeler stone hills of Anatolia. Chapter 6. The Wider World. Karahantepe, Nevalı, Çori, and Çayönü. Göbekli Tepe did not exist in isolation. Archaeologists have identified a network of similar age sites in the same region, suggesting a flourishing Neolithic culture with multiple centers. Locally, the cluster of sites in Sanliurfa province, Turkey, is now referred to as Tepeler, Turkish for stone hills, encompassing at least a dozen pre-pottery Neolithic settlements and sanctuaries that share architectural features. Among them, Karahantepe has emerged as another gem, often called Göbekli's sister site. Meanwhile, slightly later sites like Nevalı, Çori, and Çayönü provide insight into how the practices that perhaps began at places like Göbekli evolved and spread. Let's travel to these locales and see how they contribute to the story. Karahantepe. Some 35 miles, 56 kilometers east of Göbekli Tepe lies Karahantepe, discovered in 1997 by surveyor Bahattin Salik. Karahantepe sits on a ridge in the Tek Tek Mountains and covers roughly 13 hectares, comparable in area to Göbekli. Excavations began earnestly only in recent years, but already Karahantepe is astounding researchers. Like Göbekli, it boasts numerous T-shaped stone pillars. More than 250 have been identified on the surface or by survey, awaiting full excavation. The pillars display similar iconography, carvings of snakes, reliefs of animals, and those T-form anthropomorphic shapes. Radiocarbon dates and tool typology suggest Karahantepe was occupied around 9750 BCE, or a bit later, potentially even predating Göbekli Tepe by a few centuries. In other words, Karahan might be as old as, or slightly older than Göbekli's earliest construction, indicating these sites were contemporaries and perhaps created by the same culture, if not the same people. What sets Karahantepe apart are some unique features. Excavators uncovered a building with a series of phallus-shaped stone pillars rising from its floor, an open-roofed chamber literally ringed by carved erections. At one end of this penis chamber, a larger-than-life stone head, carved from the bedrock, not a separate piece, gazes towards the pillars. The head's expression is described as grimacing or stern, perhaps representing a guardian deity or ancestor overseeing a ritual of male fertility or initiation. The purpose of this chamber is still debated, but it is unlike anything yet found at Göbekli. Some think it might have been used for rites of passage, maybe a coming-of-age ceremony for young men, considering the overt phallic symbolism. The chamber might have been partially filled with water or liquid during ritual, as suggested by water-smoothed floors, adding a sensory dimension to the ceremonies. In 2023, Karahantepe yielded another extraordinary find, a 2.3 meter or 7.5 feet tall anthropomorphic statue. This statue, carved in the round, depicts a naked human figure, likely male, sitting or squatting, with hands clasping a clearly rendered phallus in front. The figure has a V-shaped necklace or collar around the neck, and deeply incised ribs and fingers, showing a surprisingly realistic anatomical detail. It strongly echoes the Urfa Man statue in the pillar figures, with the same hand placement and minimalist facial features. To find such a large human statue from this era is astonishing. It's as tall as Urfa Man and even older. The statue was found along with a carved vulture statue and fragments of other sculptures, like a leopard. The richness of the figural art at Karahantepe, including statue and carved heads, is unveiling the artistic prowess of this culture. One human stone head found has exaggerated features and likely crowned a pillar or statue now lost. Karahantepe, though only around 5% excavated so far, appears to mirror many aspects of Göbekli Tepe: T-pillars in enclosures, high-quality relief art, and evidence of intentional backfilling of structures with rubble which preserved them. In fact, the quick progress in excavating those phallic pillars happened because they were found buried intact in deliberate fill, just like Göbekli's circle. This confirms a shared ritual practice of burying sacred structures. Karahantepe also shows signs of habitation, houses or rooms with hearths, meaning it wasn't just a pilgrimage spot, but also a living site. The presence of everyday life debris, tools for daily activities, and domestic spaces indicates a settled community engaged in the upkeep of a major ritual center, a scenario increasingly considered for Göbekli Tepe as well. Archaeologically, Karahantepe's discovery underscores that Göbekli Tepe was not one of a kind, but part of a broader phenomenon. There may well be many Göbekli Tepe-like sites still underground. As one of the lead archaeologists quipped, "We have dug maybe 1% of Karahan, and I suspect thousands more pillars lie buried here, and dozens more in Tastepler sites across hundreds of kilometers." Indeed, in just the last few years, a Neolithic site called Sayberk came to light when villagers reported strange stones in their farm walls. Sayberk revealed a carved relief on a stone bench of humans, leopards, and bulls, one human holding his phallus, while a leopard stands behind him, paws on shoulders, and another figure with 6 fingers on one hand facing an auroch. The 6-finger motif had also been noticed on some Göbekli carvings, perhaps indicating a mythic trope. Extra digits sometimes signify supernatural characters. These repeated artistic themes in construction patterns point to a cultural tradition spanning multiple sites, possibly over several centuries. Nevalı Çori. To the north of Göbekli Tepe, along what is now a reservoir of the Euphrates, lay Nevalı Çori, a site that, had it not been flooded by the Ataturk Dam in the 1990s, would surely be as famous. Excavated between 1983 and 1991, Nevalı Çori dates to 8400 to 8100 BCE, placing it in the Pre-Pottery Neolithic B period. Though a bit later than Göbekli, it provides a crucial link in understanding the evolution of these early communities. Nevalı Çori was a true village with clusters of rectangular houses, but it also had a special surprise: a cult complex with T-shaped pillars similar to Göbekli's, making it one of the first sites to reveal such pillars. In a hillside cut at Nevalı Çori, archaeologists uncovered a rectangular temple building, often called the cult room or obelisk building. Its interior walls had twin freestanding T-pillars about 3 meters high, and additional pillars were integrated into the dry stone wall construction. The floor was of terrazzo polished lime, akin to what we later saw at Göbekli. It seems Nevalı Çori's people built a smaller scaled, roofed version of the Göbekli style enclosures, but within their village. They likely inherited or co-opted the pillar cult concept from earlier times and made it part of their community layout. This temple was rebuilt twice over the settlement's life, indicating continuity of its importance. Nevalı Çori also yielded remarkable sculptures, a life-sized limestone human head with detailed facial features and the peculiar tuft or snake-like protrusion on the skull, a statue of a bird, and numerous small figurines. Notably, a fragment of what seems to have been a totem pole-like sculpture was found, multiple heads or creatures stacked, which researchers tentatively reconstructed. This reminds us of the totem carving found at Göbekli, a pole with 3 figures, including a snarling predator head on top, discovered broken in the fill. The repetition of such motifs across sites underscores cultural continuity. In the Nevalı Çori temple, they even carved reliefs of human hands on some pillars, emphasizing the anthropomorphic nature of the pillars. One of Nevalı Çori's most significant contributions is the area of food production. It is at this site that archaeologists found the earliest domesticated einkorn wheat grains. This means that by the time of Nevalı Çori, circa 8300 BCE, people in this region had shifted from just harvesting wild wheat to cultivating and breeding it for desired traits, a cornerstone of the Neolithic revolution. Additionally, Nevalı Çori's community kept domesticated dogs, as dog bones are found, and possibly were experimenting with herding. Though their hunting was still important, they were clearly transitioning to farming lifestyles. This aligns with the idea that the construction of communal structures like at Göbekli Tepe either triggered or accompanied the shift to agriculture. We can almost see a continuum. Göbekli Tepe, 9600 to 8000 BCE, where we have wild resources and ephemeral habitation. Then Nevalı Çori, 8400 to 8100 BCE, where they've settled with houses, grown wheat, and still build many Göbekli shrines in their village. Nevalı Çori also provides a glimpse into domestic life architecture of the PPNB. Houses there were rectangular, often with stone foundations, and a distinct feature: underfloor channels, narrow stone-built ducts beneath the plaster floors, perhaps for drainage or cooling. This detail is interesting, also seen at Çayönü, another PPN site we'll discuss next, suggesting shared architectural ideas for housing. Within some Nevalı Çori houses, human burials were found, including skulls placed under floors, sometimes in pieces, evidence that the skull cult was part of domestic rituals too, and not just at the big sanctuary. The fact that human remains were in houses, while the special temple had none, further suggests that Göbekli-style sanctuaries might have been kept ritually clean of burials, with those practices happening in domestic spheres or separate tombs. In sum, Nevalı Çori, though now lost beneath water, gave a critical preview of the Göbekli phenomenon before Göbekli itself was dug. Its discovery of pillars in the 1980s hinted that there was an unknown tradition of stone architecture in the early Neolithic. At the time, it was revolutionary. Little did we know, a far larger example lay in wait at Göbekli Tepe. Nevalı Çori stands as a bridge between the world of Göbekli Tepe and the world of early farming villages, bridging mysticism and everyday life. Çayönü. Shifting to the east about 160 kilometers from Göbekli, in the Diyarbakır province of Turkey, we find Çayönü Tepesi. Chronologically, Çayönü spans circa 8600 to 6800 BCE, covering the late PPNA through PPNB, and even into the pottery Neolithic. It is a well-excavated large village site that documents the gradual change from foraging to full farming society. Why include Çayönü in Göbekli Tepe's story? Because archaeologists see evidence that Çayönü's early culture was a successor to or offshoot of the Göbekli Tepe culture. In fact, one study suggests that Çayönü developed from the cultural tradition of Göbekli Tepe, meaning the people who built Çayönü likely had roots or influences from the groups around Göbekli. One striking find at Çayönü is the presence of two T-shaped stelae standing stones embedded in a building from the early PPNB, layer known as terrazzo building. These stelae strongly resemble the Göbekli pillars, though smaller, and one even had a human face carved in relief upon it. They likely served as symbolic idols or altar stones. Their presence in a built house at Çayönü shows how the tradition of T-pillars was carried into later Neolithic contexts, albeit in different form. It signals continuity of a cult of standing stones well into 7500 BCE, long after Göbekli was buried. It appears the idea of worshipping or venerating stelae persisted and spread, eventually influencing cultures up to the Bronze Age. Even much later societies in the Near East kept raising sacred stones. Çayönü is also famous, or infamous, for what archaeologists dubbed the skull building. In one phase of the village, a rectangular building was discovered with a stone platform soaked in a thick layer of congealed blood, which geochemical analyses detected, and nearby an array of human skeleton parts and several skulls that had been ceremonially arranged. The blood-soaked terrazzo platform, along with cut marks on bones, strongly suggests human sacrifice or ritual slaughter took place there. It's a chilling but illuminating discovery, a clear ritual use of human blood and skulls in the Neolithic, given that this occurred in a slightly younger site geographically close. It lends weight to speculations that at Göbekli Tepe, or its culture, sacrificial rites may have been performed, though direct evidence at Göbekli is scant beyond the carved depictions and modified skulls. The skull building at Çayönü might be a more domestic continuation of whatever sacrificial or mortuary ceremonies were conducted in grander style at places like Göbekli Tepe. Some even posits that maybe the skulls at Göbekli could have been obtained via sacrifice. While we cannot be sure, the precedent at Çayönü shows that such extreme ritual behaviors were within the realm of these Neolithic people's practices. Aside from the dramatic cult evidence, Çayönü is pivotal in understanding domestication. It provides a continuous sequence where we see wild animal bones gradually replaced by domestic ones. For instance, early on they hunted many pigs. Then by around 7200 BCE, they had domesticated pigs. Çayönü is a candidate for the very first pig domestication site in the world. Similarly, sheep and goats' bones shows transition to smaller domesticated sizes by the late PPNB. And as we discussed earlier, this region was key for wheat. The slopes of nearby Karahantepe have been identified through genetics as where emmer wheat, another founder crop of agriculture, was domesticated, likely by people from sites like Çayönü. Çayönü villagers are among the earliest farmers and herders, just a few centuries after the height of Göbekli Tepe. Architecturally, Çayönü reveals the progression of building styles, from round huts like early PPNA elsewhere, to grill plan houses with subfloor stone grids for ventilation, similar to what Nevalı Çori had. Then to cell plan, multi-room houses by late PPNB. It shows increasing sophistication in permanent dwellings, a contrast to Göbekli Tepe, which lacks obvious domestic buildings at its core. This makes sense. Göbekli was a special purpose site, whereas Çayönü was a residential settlement evolving over time. Yet the overlap in ritual elements, like the pillars or skull use, indicates that the people of Çayönü likely shared the religious heritage of Göbekli's builders. Possibly descendants or neighboring groups took the torch of the cult and integrated it into everyday village life. One more site to briefly note is Kurdish Tepe, also in modern Turkey. It's slightly earlier than Göbekli, circa 10,500 to 9,500 BCE, and has rich burial in art, but no big pillars. It suggests that even before Göbekli, people were settling in small communities, making tons of decorative items, and practicing complex ritual. Kurdish yield decorated needles, stone bowls, and numerous carved stone idols. We mention it because it underscores that the entire upper Mesopotamian region was a hotbed of cultural innovation at this time. Researchers think that the artistic and symbolic traditions seen at Göbekli Tepe may have predecessors in even earlier sites like Kurdish Tepe. Göbekli Tepe, Karahantepe, Nevalı Çori, Çayönü, and others form a chain of early sites that collectively indicate a distinct civilization or cultural horizon in southeast Anatolia in northern Mesopotamia during 10,000 to 8,000 BCE. Sometimes popular media speculates about a lost civilization given the sophistication of these sites. It might not be a civilization in the sense of cities and writings, but it was a complex society or network of societies with advanced knowledge of stone construction, art, and likely shared religious myths. They were sedentary to various degrees. They exchanged ideas and likely goods across distances. For instance, shells from the Red Sea have been found at Göbekli, indicating trade or travel over hundreds of kilometers. Having surveyed the neighbors of Göbekli Tepe, we see that its phenomenon was regional. This provides context when we consider myths and broader speculations. For example, some have likened the area to the cradle of Eden because agriculture, the biblical knowledge of good and evil, or knowledge of farming metaphorically, first took root here. Klaus Schmidt himself provocatively said Göbekli Tepe is a temple in Eden, not meaning the literal Garden of Eden, but symbolically as the place where humans transitioned from the ease of hunting, gathering, innocence in Eden, to the toil of farming, expulsion, having to till the soil. The convergence of evidence that here people first abandoned the wild bounty for cultivated fields, arguably worsening their quality of life initially. Archaeology shows early farmers were less healthy on average than foragers, resonated with the Genesis allegory of the fall. We'll delve into mythic parallels like that, but first, let's ponder the climate events and migration swirling around these people's story, as such forces often seed the myth that follow. Chapter 7, After the Ice, Climate, Migrations, and Mythic Echoes. The world of Göbekli Tepe was born from climate change. As the Pleistocene epoch ended, Earth warmed significantly, and the vast ice sheets retreated. The Younger Dryas, circa 10,900 to 9,600 BCE, was a final gasp of cold, a return to near glacial conditions that likely challenged human populations. In its wake came the Holocene epoch, a long stretch of climatic stability and warmth that allowed agriculture to flourish. Our Neolithic builders stood right at that pivot. We can imagine that their grandparents or great-grandparents witnessed the abrupt cold of Younger Dryas, and then within a lifetime or two, saw climates mellow. This transitional period must have been jarring and inspiring in equal measure. The world was changing, perhaps seen as the work of gods or cosmic events. Some scientists hypothesize that around 10,800 BCE, a cosmic impact or airburst, comet fragments hitting Earth's atmosphere, triggered the Younger Dryas cooling by spewing dust and causing massive wildfires. This is the contested Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. If something like a comet strike occurred, it would have been an unforgettable cataclysm for humans of that time. Sudden sky explosions may be regional extinctions and a sharp downturn in climate. Could this have seeded legends? It's tantalizing to think that perhaps the memory of a great burning sky or floods as ice-damped lakes burst with meltwater passed down orally. By the time of Göbekli Tepe's construction centuries later, those memories might have morphed into mythic tales of wrathful deities or a great flood that destroyed a former world. Later Mesopotamian and global myths indeed speak of a flood or deluge, the epic of Gilgamesh's flood, or the biblical Noah's flood. While those are usually tied to events around 3000 BCE or so, like the flooding of the Black Sea or Tigris-Euphrates floods, some theorists have speculated if they could be the echoes of much older events like sea level rise after the Ice Age. The Younger Dryas impact theory proponents even claim that Göbekli Tepe's Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone, encodes an astronomical date of around 10,950 BCE, which coincides with the hypothesized impact, thus preserving a record of the worst day in history. They interpret the animals as constellations and the circle and crescent motif as a comet or the sun, basically a sky map of that event. This view is highly controversial and not widely accepted. Archaeologists like Jens Notroff have critiqued it vigorously, but it's an intriguing intersection of climate science and archaeology. Even if Göbekli's builders did not literally carve a comet record, the idea underscores how major climate events can loom large in cultural memory. Now, as climate improved post 9600 BCE, human populations likely expanded and migrated into newly verdant areas. The Levantine Natufians, Epipaleolithic sedentary foragers in Palestine, Syria, may have moved north into Anatolia, mixing with local groups. Genetic evidence shows that Neolithic people at Chinua had an ancestry mix from Anatolia, the Levant, and the Zagros. This indicates that different human groups came together in Upper Mesopotamia, perhaps exchanging ideas, symbols, and rituals. We might imagine small bands from diverse regions meeting at rich resource zones like the Upper Euphrates or Tigris valleys and sharing knowledge. One group shows another how to make better blades. Another shares a story of a sky god. And together, they start something new, like building a stone sanctuary. The Fertile Crescent wasn't a monolith. It was a mosaic of cultures intermingling. The mythology that emerged in the ancient Near East millennia later, with sky gods, fertility goddesses, divine councils, could have very deep roots, possibly traceable to the synthesis of beliefs in these early convergence zones. One fascinating theoretical link is the Watchers, or Nephilim mythology, from later tradition found in apocryphal Jewish texts like the Book of Enoch. These stories speak of a time before the flood, when heavenly beings, Watchers, came to earth, taught humans various arts like metallurgy, agriculture, astronomy, and spawned a race of giant offsprings, Nephilim. It's pure mythology, but some fringe theorists have drawn parallels to Göbekli Tepe. Could the notion of advanced knowledge descending at the dawn of civilization be a distant echo of real events, such as knowledge of architecture or agriculture arising suddenly? Of course, mainstream science attributes these changes to human innovation, not divine intervention. But it's interesting how mythic themes sometimes mirror archaeological narratives in a poetic way. For instance, the idea of tall stone pillars may be seen as petrified giants or symbols of great beings, might have influenced later giant legends. Andrew Collins, a writer on alternate history, even titled a book, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, suggesting that this site fits the time of when legends of gods among men could have originated. While speculative, it reminds us that these early monuments may have inspired stories passed down through countless generations. The sky itself was a canvas for myth. Under the dark Neolithic sky, without light pollution, the Milky Way would have been a glittering river of stars. Did the Göbekli people look up and connect the stars with their carved animals? Some alignments have been proposed, for example, the possibility that certain enclosures aligned with certain star risings or cardinal directions. One academic idea is that the structures might align to the summer solstice sunrise or certain star positions circa 9000 BCE. A more specific French claim by researcher Andrew Collins is that the enclosures in their central pillars align northwest towards the setting of the star Deneb in the constellation Cygnus, the celestial northern cross. Collins notes features like the small notches or sighting holes on some pillars could be aligned to view stars like Deneb, which he posits had special significance as a gateway to the sky. Similarly, another suggestion by Robert Stokes is in alignment to Orion's belt when they were at certain positions on the horizon. These celestial alignment theories remain unproven and are part of the speculative domain, but the very attempt highlights our human impulse to connect monuments with the cosmos. If we imagine ourselves in that era, the cyclic sky, sun, moon, stars would indeed be deeply connected to ritual. perhaps the circle of pillars symbolized the cosmos itself. A circular enclosure with two central pillars might represent two great cosmic pillars holding up the sky, a motif found in many mythologies, like the concept of Atlas holding the heavens, or twin mountains flanking the world. The animals could be celestial clans or spirits. For instance, later Mesopotamian star lore assigned animals to constellations: Taurus, the bull; Scorpius, the scorpion, etc. It's not far-fetched that Göbekli people could have had proto-constellations or stories for star groups, though, as Notroff pointed out, expecting them to match the classical constellation is likely wrong. They might have seen their own patterns. Perhaps the vulture was a prominent star pattern for them. If so, their carvings might double as a star map in a way we don't readily recognize. Now, stepping into more mythic speculation, consider the notion of a lost paradise. Göbekli Tepe is located at the northern edge of Mesopotamia. Interestingly, Genesis describes Eden as having a garden from which 4 rivers flowed, including the Euphrates and Tigris. Some researchers have tried to place Eden in eastern Turkey for this reason, though that doesn't match the biblical specifics. The general region was indeed a garden of early domestication. Could memories of the shift from foraging to farming, which brought both progress and hardship, have later been couched in a tale of Eden? It's a alluring poetic thought that the Garden of Eden story may allegorically encode the transition where humans left the easy garden of life of hunter-gatherers and enter the toilsome agricultural life. Klaus Schmidt's comment that Göbekli Tepe was a temple in Eden meant exactly that allegory. When media ran with it, some took it literally, causing a bit of confusion, but Schmidt clarified he spoke metaphorically. Another universal myth is the Great Flood. Many cultures have flood myths. Could it be that the memory of rising seas as Ice Age glaciers melted became embedded in cultural consciousness? By 7000 BCE, sea levels had risen dramatically, over 100-meter rise since the glacial maximum, which would have flooded coastal areas and possibly forced populations inland. Some speculate that the flooding of the Black Sea, once a smaller freshwater lake, around 5600 BCE, might have influenced the Noah's Ark story. That's much later than Göbekli's time. However, consider that around 8200 BCE, there was a sudden cooling event, called the 8.2 kiloyear event, possibly triggered by a massive release of glacial meltwater, which could have caused regional flooding or climate stress. If any floods or climate downturns happened around or after Göbekli's heyday, those might have spurred people to bury sites or migrate. We note that Göbekli Tepe was abandoned around the time the 8.2K cooling event occurred, although cause and effect aren't established. It's tempting to link abandonment to environmental changes. If harsh times came, perhaps they felt their gods had turned or a need to ritually close the sacred space. Myths of a flooding punishing mankind often involved humanity doing something to anger the gods, maybe in distant memory, leaving the pure state of foraging, which some later might have idealized, and starting farming was seen by descendants as a kind of transgression. We see how climate, real or perceived cosmic events, and lifestyle shifts could weave into narratives that endure. Early agricultural societies often also have creation myths involving the discovery of farming, sometimes gifted by deities. In Sumerian myth, for instance, the gods Enki and Enlil play roles in bringing order and gifts to humans. It's speculative, but one could imagine that at a place like Göbekli Tepe, stories were told of how the wild animals came to an agreement with humans, or how the first grains were given by divine beings. Perhaps they had tales of ancestral figures, maybe represented by the central pillars, who taught them ceremonies or how to carve stone. Those would be the seeds of later hero or god myths. As we stand at Göbekli Tepe at night, the vault of stars turning overhead, we feel connected to those ancient stargazers. You might close your eyes and fancy hearing a distant drum, picturing constellations as animals creeping across the heavens. The calm of the site today belies what must have been intense ritual energy in the past. In that energy, myth is born. Humans seeking explanations and meaning in the cosmos, in their changing world. In summary, the end of the Ice Age and the start of the Holocene not only provided the conditions for agriculture and sites like Göbekli Tepe to rise, but likely also imprinted on human culture profound themes: paradise lost, the ease of foraging left behind, cosmic punishment or cataclysm, and guidance from beyond, the need for new knowledge, whether from gods or human innovation. Göbekli Tepe's people navigated these transitions and left us a snapshot in stone of their worldview. As we prepare to discuss speculative theories in the next chapter, it's valuable to ground ourselves in these tangible influences, climate and mythic imagination, which are two sides of understanding ancient mysteries, one factual, one interpretive. Now, having explored the environmental and mythological context, we are ready to venture into the realm of speculation more directly. What do people theorize about Göbekli Tepe beyond the academic consensus? What tantalizing idea connect this site to lost knowledge or advanced civilizations? We will consider these ideas as part of the broader fascination Göbekli Tepe has sparked. Chapter 8: Between the Known and the Unknown. Göbekli Tepe's discovery has not only rewritten scholarly textbooks, it has also ignited the imagination of many beyond academia. In this chapter, we drift into that twilight zone of interpretation where mainstream archaeological conclusions meet speculative theories. Remember, in a site with no written record, there is space for wonder. Here are the key interpretations and hypotheses orbiting Göbekli Tepe. The mainstream view, a cult center of hunter-gatherers. First, to anchor ourselves, let's summarize the consensus view held by most archaeologists. Göbekli Tepe is seen as a communal ceremonial center built by hunter-gatherer groups in the transition to agriculture. It likely served religious or social functions, a place for ritual gatherings, feasting, and spiritual activities that bound together mobile bands in a shared community. The construction of such a site required unprecedented cooperation, which may have been a driving factor in these societies settling down and eventually domesticating plants and animals in order to support large projects. In this view, Göbekli Tepe marks the beginning of complex society, temples before cities, as we have emphasized. Its builders had no mysterious advanced technology. They leveraged plentiful manpower, stone tools, and clever engineering tricks like stone ball bearings, round stones possibly used to roll pillars. There is no need to invoke lost civilizations or extraterrestrial help. The people of the time, given the right social impetus, were fully capable of this, just as later hunter-gatherers built megaliths like Stonehenge or the Moai of Easter Island. The mainstream interpretation holds that the symbols and animals reflect the spiritual world of these people, likely tied to shamanistic or totemistic beliefs regarding death, rebirth, and nature. The dangerous animals might symbolize spiritual guardians or challenges one faces in a ritual journey. In short, Göbekli Tepe was a spiritual hub for early post-Ice Age humans, showcasing their cognitive and social leap. It was unique, but also part of a continuum, leading to settled village life and organized religion. Once its purpose was fulfilled, possibly due to societal changes, the adoption of farming, or climate shifts, it was respectfully buried and abandoned. Mainstream scholars base this view on excavation data, radiocarbon dating, and parallels with sites like those we've discussed. They caution against romanticizing the site with too much mystery. They see it as extraordinary, but explainable within human development. Yet, as with any great archaeological find, mysteries remain. Why exactly was it built? No definitive purpose is agreed on. Was it for ancestor worship? Initiation rites? A regional pilgrimage festival site? Also, who exactly were the builders? Did they have a certain ethnic or tribal identity now lost? With such gaps, the canvas is blank enough for alternative ideas to be painted. Ancient advanced civilization hypothesis. One of the most provocative suggestions is that Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated invention of local hunter-gatherers, but rather the legacy or project of an advanced civilization that existed during the Ice Age and was destroyed by a cataclysm, such as the purported Younger Dryas comet impact. This theory has been popularized by writers like Graham Hancock, who in his book Magician of the Gods proposed that an advanced seafaring culture imparted knowledge to hunter-gatherers after a catastrophe around 10,800 BCE. In this scenario, sites like Göbekli Tepe are seen as too advanced to have appeared spontaneously. Instead, they are evidence of teachers, survivors of a lost civilization, who guided locals in constructing monumental centers to preserve knowledge or restart civilization. Hancock points to the suddenness and sophistication of Göbekli Tepe's emergence, megaliths without precursor, art and engineering seemingly appearing full-fledged, as hints that a precursor knowledge was at play. He often notes how Göbekli Tepe fully formed stone carvings ability is evident from the earliest layers, with no clear trial and error buildup, which to him suggests an external input of skills. Mainstream archaeologists, however, argue that the skills did develop locally, and we simply haven't found all the precursors, though sites like Karahantepe and Nevalı Çori do show development. Another proponent is Andrew Collins, who entertains that Göbekli Tepe could be connected to the Denisovans, an enigmatic archaic human species known from Siberia that possibly had advanced cognition. This is very speculative, as there's no evidence Denisovans were involved. They died out long before, though some of their genes live on in us. Such ideas try to explain Göbekli's advancement by attributing it to someone other than the known human cultures of that time, which many archaeologists find unnecessary and lacking evidence. Imagine an elder from a forgotten seafaring people arriving in Anatolia after a flood, carrying with him the memory of grandeur, instructing the natives to erect pillars aligned to the stars to warn future generations of the cataclysm. It's a dramatic story, and indeed, Hancock sees Pillar 43's purported comet depiction as exactly such a message to the future, encoded in stone. What do archaeologists say to advanced lost civilization claims? Generally, they respond that there's zero direct evidence of any such technologically advanced culture. No mysterious alloys, no precision tools, no writing or unique artifacts foreign to known late Stone Age context. Everything found at Göbekli can be made and understood with what we know of human capabilities in 10,000 BCE. Yes, it's surprising, but humans then were as intelligent as we are. It's worth noting that Göbekli Tepe's people did not have metal or the wheel, but they managed fine. Often overlooked is that organized labor and time are powerful tools, and the hunter-gatherers had detailed knowledge of stone, wood, and rope. However, Proponents of the lost civilization idea ask, where did the knowledge to settle and build come from so suddenly? Some answers may be from the necessity and brainstorming of many groups coming together. Others could be from the remnants of an older society that had experimented with civilization. The truth may simply be that human society was ready by that point. People had already been building non-residential structures, for example, communal buildings in Natufian times, or early ritual structures like at Jurfel Amar. Göbekli Tepe might be a culmination of these trends, rather than an anomaly. Archaeoastronomy, temples of the stars. We touched on alignments earlier. The speculative highlight here is the idea that Göbekli Tepe's very layout and carvings are tied to astronomical alignments or events. The most famous claim comes from Martin Sweatman and Demetrio Tsikritsis, 2017, who assert Pillar 43's imagery is an astronomical date marking a comet impact around 10,950 BCE. Specifically, they interpret the animals as representing constellations. For example, the vulture might represent Cygnus or perhaps Sagittarius, the scorpion Clelius Scorpius, etc. Using computer simulations, they found that around 10,950 BCE, the arrangements of the constellation relative to the sun at summer solstice could match the layout on Pillar 43 if one assumes certain identifications. The small animal and bird figures are taken as star asterism, and the circular disk on the vulture's wing as the sun or comet. They concluded Göbekli Tepe's people commemorated a great event, the beginning of Younger Dryas, on that stone. Additionally, they suggest the very reason for building these enclosures might have been to observe the heavens for fear of recurring meteor showers. It's a heady theory bridging astronomy and prehistory. Mainstream researchers like Jens Notroff have been skeptical. Notroff's counterpoints include the chronological gap. Göbekli's oldest is 1,000 years after the event. The arbitrary picking of which carvings to match, ignoring many others. And the assumption that constellations were recognized the same way by these people. Also, the headless man with an erect phallus on Pillar 43 doesn't fit a simple doom and gloom comet tale. The debate exemplifies how ambiguous symbols can be read in wildly different ways. Another astronomical idea is structural alignment. Researcher Gilbert et al., 2020, found that 3 of Göbekli's enclosures may align to form an equilateral triangle, which might indicate a direction of alignment when viewed as a whole. Andrew Collins sees a consistent orientation of enclosures or sightlines in them toward the setting of Deneb, Alpha Cygni, around 9000 BCE. Why Deneb? In some myths, Cygnus, the swan, is a psychopompt constellation carrying souls analogous to the vulture's role. Collins suggests the people revered the part of the sky around the celestial North Pole, which at that time pointed near Vega in Deneb, as in Axis Mundi, the portal of souls. It's an interesting idea tying into the vulture soul-carrying motif. If indeed some structures faced northwest, maybe they did face the setting of a key star or a certain stellar event. Alternatively, they may align to a cardinal direction or a solstice sun. Some preliminary surveys have tried to check if central pillars align with sunrise or sunset at equinox or solstice, with mixed results. Given we are dealing with multiple phases in possibly roofed structures, alignment might be coincidental. From a meditative perspective, thinking of Göbekli Tepe as an observatory in addition to a sanctuary is appealing. Picture priests or shamans peering through a stone enclosure's doorway at the rising of a particular star, marking seasons or eras. It could have helped schedule annual migrations or rituals, much like Stonehenge's solstice alignment did for its builders. The truth is, we don't know if they had formal astronomy, but they surely observed the heavens closely. All traditional people do. At minimum, the cosmology of these people likely involved the sky. Perhaps each animal was associated with a part of the sky or time of year. That is speculation, but it springs naturally from human inclination to find patterns above. Encoded knowledge in proto-writing. Some speculative trends suggest Göbekli Tepe might have been an ancient repository of knowledge, like a library in stone, meant to preserve information through cataclysm. This ties into the advanced civilization narrative. For example, survivors encoded their science or history in carvings for future generations. Pillar 43's potential encoding of a date is one such alleged piece of knowledge. Others have pointed to recurring symbols, like the H-like symbol or the three-hand motif, as possible proto-writing or mnemonics. We know true writing doesn't appear until much later, Sumer around 3300 BCE. But pictographic communication, or symbol systems, could have existed. Some engraved markers on Göbekli stone might not be mere decoration, but could convey meaning. For example, a sequence of animal symbols could be a myth line or a commemorative narrative of events. One can speculate. Maybe the site was used to teach or initiate people into certain knowledge, astronomical lore, calendrical knowledge, tracking seasons for hunting or gathering, or even metaphysical concepts of life and death. The arrangement of enclosures by orientation could encode a compass or cosmological directions. For example, if enclosure D is aligned to the north, enclosure C to a different bearing, etc., the whole site might map a cosmology. This is analogous to how later sacred sites sometimes align to cardinal points or significant directions. Some authors have likened the site's layout to a giant mandala or a reflection of a mythic map. Mainstream scholars would usually respond, "Careful, we risk over-interpreting randomness." Often, what looks like an encoded complexity can arise without intentional design, especially if we have small sample size. But they also wouldn't rule out that the site expresses a belief system. Clearly it does, we just haven't deciphered it. The difference is between saying they had an advanced code versus they had a rich symbolic tradition. The latter is sure, the former remains unproven. The geometry discovery, the triangle between centers, might hint at planning knowledge. It suggests use of straight lines and maybe right angles to plan layout. This could be seen as them having an understanding of geometry well before the Greeks, but we know even earlier people could achieve geometry practically, for example in pyramids or stone circles, which long predates formal geometry studies. That in itself is knowledge, being able to survey and align, which implies some conceptual grasp of space, perhaps within those societies. Such knowledge was esoteric, taught within certain families or guilds. Connection to later myths and legends. It is almost poetic to draw lines from Göbekli Tepe to stories told thousands of years later in the same region. We already discussed Eden and flood motifs. Some have wondered if the myth of the Tower of Babel, a human-built structure to reach heaven that angered God in Genesis, could have a distant echo of ancient monumental building. Babel's story is usually placed in Mesopotamia millennia later, but conceptually, humans banding together to build something huge and sky-oriented. Göbekli fits that motif in a way, though no suggestion of divine punishment aside from eventual abandonment. There's no evidence linking the two beyond thematic resonance, so it remains an imaginative parallel. Another angle is, could Göbekli Tepe have influenced the iconography of later cultures? The region around Sanlurfa, ancient Edessa, had lots of folklore. For example, the cult of Mithra, a mysterious religion of the Roman era, has iconography of a bull and scorpion and snake together in the famous Tauroctony scene. It's a stretch, but those animals are also at Göbekli. Coincidence or deep cultural archetypes? Most likely coincidence, as the gap is enormous. However, it reminds us that certain symbols, like serpents and scorpions, have fascinated humans across time, often as symbols of danger or guardianship. The continuity of using pillars in sacred stones does persist. Later in the Bronze Age, standing stones and betyls, sacred stones, were common in Near Eastern temples. Perhaps the idea of a sacred stone pillar as the abode of a god began in places like Göbekli and echoed down the ages. One can also fancy that stories of giants or beings turned to stone might be inspired by seeing big T-pillars partly unearthed. Sometimes local folklore around ruins speak of giants built this, or people were turned to stone here. Unfortunately, we don't have a rich record of folkloric stories about Göbekli Tepe prior to its excavation. The locals knew it as a ruin, but not much else. The calm reality is likely that by the time writing emerged around 3300 BCE, Göbekli Tepe had been buried for 5,000 years and was unknown to those people, so direct influence on recorded mythology is unlikely. But as an exercise in wonder, perhaps the memory of a golden age when humans first erected temples and then something happened survived as vague myth. Sumerians had a notion of antediluvian cities and sages that existed before a great flood. They list temples and cities predating the flood, like Eridu. Göbekli Tepe could fit the idea of an antediluvian sacred place, long gone by Sumerian times, known only dimly through oral tradition. That's speculation, but it's fun to think the Sumerian scribes listing Eridu as the first city with a shrine may have been onto a truth that indeed, long before Sumer, people built sanctuaries in stone. Alternate functions more than a temple. While calling it the world's first temple is common, a few researchers have posited alternative views. One suggestion is, could Göbekli Tepe have been a sort of regional center for social gatherings, trade, or even a funerary necropolis? Schmidt thought it was mostly ritual, lacking domestic debris. But new evidence suggests more daily life. Some have likened it to a cathedral on a hill, implying multiple clans would come here for seasonal ceremonies, like medieval peasants trekking to a grand cathedral on holy days. Maybe it was a pilgrimage and fair site. After ceremonies, people might trade goods, arrange marriages, etc., thus also functioning as a hub of social and economic exchange. This isn't contradictory to mainstream, just an expansion. Because of the animal focus, could it have been like a zodiac calendar or used for shamanic vision quests, the carvings inspiring trance journeys? Given the dangerous animals, maybe shamans used the imagery to confront fears in controlled rituals, a kind of psychological initiation. We recall Hodder's thought that maybe they built this complex to master their fears of wild nature by ritually containing these creatures in stone. It's a compelling notion, the site as a magical defense, or a way to symbolically control the dangerous world around them. If that's the case, the speculative dimension is that perhaps the ceremonies enacted triumphs over these beasts. Maybe costume dances where humans wearing animal pelts dramatized cosmic battles. This edges into myth-making again. Finally, there's speculation on why they buried it. One French claim is that around 8,200 BCE, when a mini ice age occurred, they thought another disaster was looming and deliberately buried their temples to preserve them or as an offering to appease gods. It's possible the environment got worse. We know of the 8.2K cooling event, and maybe they lost faith or decided to start anew elsewhere. Some have dramatically framed it as the site was buried, and memory of it purposefully erased, perhaps due to a religious shift or crisis of fate. That invites parallels to stories of sudden iconoclasm or mass religious changes. like Akhenaten's temple in Egypt being buried after his death by the next pharaoh. But with no writing, we can't know. They buried it likely as part of a final ritual. The reason could be reverence, retiring the sacred site much as the Nabateans buried their sanctuary at Baalbek in offerings when Romans came. Or practicality, maybe the society was moving and didn't want it desecrated, so they covered it. Interestingly, it preserved it for us, perhaps inadvertently fulfilling a buried knowledge for the future motif that alternate theorists love to propose. So, as we wander out of the realm of speculation, back to solid ground, let's gently conclude our journey. We will reflect on Göbekli Tepe's legacy, what it means for us today, and the quiet lessons it imparts about human resilience and imagination. Chapter 9: Legacy of Göbekli Tepe. Beneath the stars in the slow sweep of constellations, the stones of Göbekli Tepe stand in eternal vigil. The ancient hill is quiet now, save for the soft sounds of nocturnal wind and an archaeologist's footstep. One can almost feel the presence of those who came before, those who raised these pillars with aching arms and fervent hearts. In this calm final moment, we step back and absorb the magnitude of what Göbekli Tepe represents. Göbekli Tepe invites us to reconsider the journey of civilization. It tells a simple yet profound truth. The human spirit for meaning and community predates the comforts of settled life. Before we build cities, we build temples in our hearts and on our hilltops. In this sense, Göbekli Tepe is a testament to the power of belief and cooperation. Its people had nothing of what we call civilized trappings. No metal tools, no wheels, no writing. Yet they achieved a cultural flowering that would become the seed for so much to come. They proved that social complexity, the ability to organize, to envision grand projects, was within the grasp of nomadic folk when inspired by a unifying purpose. As Ian Hodder observed, here, socio-cultural changes come first. Agriculture comes later. It was the ceremonial gathering that laid the groundwork for village life, turning wandering hunters into settlers and farmers. This reverses our long-held narrative of how history unfolded, and it humbles us. In the stillness of Potbelly Hill, there is also a lesson about transience and continuity. The people of Göbekli Tepe invested enormous effort in something that they eventually buried and left behind. Life moved on. New generations may have moved to new pastures, cultivated new fields, and built new shrines in their villages. Göbekli Tepe was lovingly entombed, its pillars sleeping under the earth for millennia. Yet far from being lost forever, it waited for us. When we rediscovered it in the 20th century, it was like hearing an echo from a time before. The site persisted precisely because its creators chose to preserve it by burials. In a poetic twist, those ancient people might have unintentionally ensured their memory would outlast even their own descendants' knowledge. How many human creations are so lucky to find a second life after 10,000 years? Göbekli Tepe's legacy is also carried in how it sparks our imagination today. In that sense, the site lives on not just in textbooks, but in the collective psyche. It encourages a cross-disciplinary wonder. Archaeologists work meticulously to uncover facts. Historians and anthropologists interpret social meaning. Astronomers and dreamers gaze up and ponder alignments. The theologians and philosophers reflect on what early religion looked like under those stone lintels. It has also become a symbol of Turkey's rich heritage, celebrated in museums and protected as a World Heritage treasure. Tourists walk the boardwalks around the enclosures, marveling at the carved foxes and lions with the same awe that one might feel in a Gothic cathedral, in awe at human devotion across the ages. Claude Schmidt, who devoted nearly 20 years to this site, often guided visitors at dawn among the stones. One can imagine him, a quiet figure with a white scarf, standing by a pillar etched with a Hittite eagle, and asking us to imagine what the landscape looked like 11,000 years ago. He saw gazelles and rivers in his mind's eye, and now, because of his work, we all can share that vision. Schmidt passed away, but his dream echoes through every new discovery in each paper published. Similarly, current lead archaeologists and others push the research forward, bridging modern science and ancient art. The site's study is ongoing and likely will be for decades. As of 2025, excavation continued to reveal surprises, more pillars, more sculptures, more clues about dwellings and daily life. We are truly, as Negmi said, only at the beginning of understanding this hidden civilization. In the broader sweep, Göbekli Tepe reminds us that history is not a straight line. It has moments of leap and regression, of miracles and mystery. The Neolithic revolution was not a one-time event, but a drawn-out, locally varied process. Göbekli's people were innovators. They invented new forms of social ritual that allowed them to gather in unprecedented numbers, thereby creating conditions for technological innovation, like intensive grain use and architectural skills. In a sense, their feasts and prayers paved the way for domesticating wheat and animals. They may not have foreseen the full consequences of what they started. How could they? But they set humanity on a new path. Perhaps there is a gentle caution too. As per the Eden allegory, with greater knowledge in society came new hardships. They traded one way of life for another. Yet that trade also unlocked our potential to build the modern world. In the calm of reflection, one might feel gratitude to these early ancestors. They dared to experiment with complexity, and from that experiment, all later achievements grew. As we close, let's envision a small scene. It's twilight at Göbekli Tepe once more. The horizon grows purple. You stand at the edge of Enclosure D, peering down at the twin central pillars, 18 and 31, that tower over the others, their tops nearly level with your gaze from the walkway. They almost look like two broad-shouldered beings frozen mid-ceremony. The carvings on them catch the oblique light. Here, a fox in profile. There, an abstract wing or hand. Touching the cool air, you feel the silence of a place once filled with voices. In your mind, if you listen closely, you might hear faint echoes, the rhythmic beat of a drum, the murmur of a gathering crowd, perhaps the distant call of a shaman invoking the sky. The pillars cast long shadows now, as they did long ago on some forgotten evening. Above, the first stars prick the sky. Perhaps it is Deneb shining, or Sirius rising. You realize these same stars looked down on this hill when the pillars were new. The people here lived, laughed, worshipped, and moved on. But the stars and the stones remain, bridging then and now. In this meditative stillness, Göbekli Tepe offers a sense of continuity with deep time. We feel small under the stars, yet connected to something vast. The site's legacy is exactly that feeling, a humbling and uniting one. It collapses the chasm of ages. As we conclude our journey, we carry that sense with us, a calm assurance that humanity's story is older and more wondrous than we knew, and that even the most primitive times we were capable of dreaming grandly, building enduringly, and communing with the cosmos. Göbekli Tepe slumbers again in the night, but its story awakens something within us, a quiet reverence for our collective past, and an awareness that the quest for meaning is among the oldest of human quests. We have walked among the first temple's stone and come away enriched. Our modern lives just a chapter in the long human saga that places like Göbekli Tepe began writing so long ago.